Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Hi, I'm Rory and welcome to episode 295 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Our special guest is Kate Beckwith. She has a Master of Arts and MA in Psychodynamic Counselling. She's a Fine Arts graduate holding a first-class honours degree in Fine Arts, a member of the Equine Assisted and Facilitated Practitioners Network, and an accredited member of the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy. And Kate will be sharing her unique approach to therapy using both the outdoors, animals and art to provide children with a unique therapeutic experience. So with that said, let's get on with today's episode.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Lise Oakes and Ken Kelly.
A very, very warm welcome to episode 295 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Rory and I are delighted to welcome you. A great episode today, starting off with ethical, sustainable practice, where we're speaking about crafting meaningful connections, enhancing your first contact with counselling clients. And that can be either if they reach out to you via email or via form on your website, or it may be that first connection with them in the therapy room. We then go into Practice Matters. That's the CPD section of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, where Rory, you reached out and you've already mentioned this. You spoke with Kate Beckwith on using outdoors in child therapy. So looking forward to that one. And then on to Student Services, where we recognise you on your formal counselling qualification journey. And we're going to be speaking today about the challenges of perhaps being asked to have compulsory placement supervision with a certain supervisor who's maybe connected to the organisation or the placement that you are working in. Of course, there's pros for that, but we're going to look at maybe some of the challenges that may come up and what you can do about that. So make sure you stick around for that one. But let's kick off today, Rory, that ethical, sustainable practice. And when we cover this topic, we're covering the ethics part of running a private practice, but we also look at the sustainability side of being able to make a living from that we love. And I think this keys in to both ethical and sustainability today when we speak about that crafting meaningful connections with that very first contact that we have with a counselling client, Rory.
Yes, and this is an interesting one. It's a personal one for me because a few years ago, I came to a point in my life where I needed to just explore a few elements of my life, and I reached out for a counsellor. And even though I do this all the time, make podcasts, write articles, do all sorts of things, the boot was firmly on the other foot. I was a client, and I felt nervous. I felt a bit worried. I felt a little bit of a little bit of shame because of the stuff that was coming up because I wanted to talk about. I'd got this stuff that I needed to get out and I had a lot of emotions around that, one of which was shame. So I thought, well, I'll just reach out. How difficult can it be? And I was disappointed, if I'm honest. I contacted a number of people. So I did what a lot of clients would do. I had a look at profiles. I tried to get a sense of who that person was, a sense if I could work with them, sense if they were local. And I reached out and sometimes I got no response. So I'd leave a message on an answering machine, which just had, I have to say, the generic answering message that's built into the phone. They're not here at the moment. Leave a message and we'll get back to you. Left a message, never heard anything. And then some had, the name of the counselling organisation or who they were, their practice, and I never heard anything from them. I sent some emails, never heard anything. I got one email responder back, and an email responder is where you send an email and it's like an out of office response. So the email client, the email mechanism automatically sends an email out when it's received. And it wasn't the best worded. And it gave me no indication of when that person had contacted me, when they'd be back. And by this time I was thinking, perhaps I won't bother.
Yeah.
Perhaps I won't bother. And then I phoned someone up and they answered the phone. They answered the phone with the name of their practice. Yeah. And they were wonderful. And that person, they're only literally a walk away from where I live, which was even more surprising. But we had, I think it was a useful piece of work, fantastic therapist. And I left feeling a lot better than when I went. However, that initial contact, and more to the point, when I contacted somebody who had sort of deemed it necessary to phone me back, they left a message, and I said, why didn't you have a message on your machine? And he went, oh, sorry. It's like, okay, well, thank you. Anyway, I've got a therapist now. So how many people are left not reaching out? They're taking courage to reach out, Ken. They want some help. They've got all these feelings that's going through them. They're a bit trepidant. And then when you get to the point of actually reaching out, they're getting no response. Yeah. Now, my experience may be unusual. I'm sure there's lots of people who reach out and find people. But I think that it's something we need to talk about. And I think, if you're running your own practice and you're using the money to pay for your tea bags and pay your bills, you don't want to be losing people before they've even contacted you.
Yeah. And sadly, Rory, this is not an isolated case that only applies to you. I've heard it a number of times over. I experienced it when I looked for my own counselling when I was in placement and I needed to do my own counselling as part of my counselling studies. But I've also heard it very, very sadly from clients that will mention, you're the only person who got back to me back when I was in practice and serving in that way. And I think this is a really important topic from a standpoint of ethics and a standpoint of sustainability. From an ethical perspective, I just think it's unthinkable that a client, maybe at their darkest moment, when they've built up that courage to go, you know what, okay, now I'm going to take that step. And it is a massive step to reach out and ask another human being for some help and guidance. That can be an incredibly massive step that can take some people many years to get to. For them to not receive a reply when they've sent that message out, when they've made themselves vulnerable, I just shudder at that, with what the ethical implications of that are. And from a sustainability point of view, if we're not getting back to clients, then chances are they're not going to engage our services, and they're not going to be, as you mentioned, Rory, in jest contributing to the payment of the tea bags.
No.
So there's two sides to this, and I think that I don't think that there is a counsellor that I've ever met that would deliberately do this. I think that it comes, maybe if it is happening, it comes from maybe an out of sight, out of mind kind of thought pattern. So I'm going to give you an example. When we first qualify, we may be going through a process of registering ourselves in a number of different places. We might be putting ourselves on listing directories. We might be putting ourselves on counselling directories and getting our name and our details out. Well, when was that? And have you changed your details since then? So if you've maybe 5 years ago went out and put some details out on a listing site, and you've maybe changed your email, or you've changed your mobile number that you use for your practice, what's happening when people are using that email or that old outdated phone? So I think the first step in this as a practitioner is to look around and make sure that our digital footprint, and this is something we speak about often, but not just our digital footprint, it might be pamphlets as well. Think about what messaging has been put out there. You can look yourself up, look up your name, put the word counselling in there. So for me, I might maybe put Kenneth Kelly Counselling, and I would look and see where am I coming up to make sure that all my details are relevant and that they are current. So there's one area where it can fall through the cracks. And I think the second area where it can fall through the cracks, Rory, is in the running of a busy practice. You know, we're busy, we've got lots of clients, we've got client notes to write, we might be offering supervision and having to write reports for supervisees, and there's a lot of work in running and maintaining a practice, and sometimes we might not get around to things like answering our email. We might go, you know what, I'll go through my emails tomorrow, or the next day, I've been a bit busy today, or as you said, Rory, not neglecting to have a dedicated line for our practice, that we have a message on that we get back to as soon as we pick those messages up, and keeping that in date as well. I'm just going to share, we make this recording in March of 2024. That's when the live recording is being made. Just yesterday, Rory, I reached out to a supplier. This has nothing to do with counselling and psychotherapy. It's somebody that I was dealing with. I got hold of them before they were open, and I got their answering message, and they said on their answering message, "We are sorry, we are particularly busy over this Christmas period, and we do hope that you will bear with us." And I'm getting this message in March, very outdated. I did not feel like a valued customer. And it's just an oversight on their side. They're not doing it on purpose, but it takes that extra level of thinking, and peers like yourself and I, Rory, having this discussion to bring it top of mind so that we go, all right, and let me go and have a look at that. But I think we'll speak about some do's and don'ts on this, Rory, so kind of as a guidance here. And again, we're not the experts. We're just two peers having the discussion. This is about you, your practice, and how you choose to tackle this topic of that first contact. Someone reaches out for you. What do they find?
Absolutely. And just to remind everybody, we have a handout for this. If you go to counsellingtutor.com, go to the podcast tab, go to episode 295. I've created a handout, and it's called Crafting Meaningful Connections, Enhancing Your First Contact with Counselling Clients. It's got some do's and don'ts. So let's look at the do's. So first of all, do respond promptly. And by promptly, a prompt response really does show that you're professional and consider the inquiry a priority. And how to do that, you don't have to respond immediately, but you do have to give the person an indication of the time frame you will be getting back to them. So aim to reply in 24 hours. Say, if you've got an answering machine message or you've got an email responder, that you will get back to them within 24 hours, and even acknowledge the receipt of their inquiry, and tell them that there's going to be a more detailed response coming. I used to have on my phone, I'm not available at the moment. I used to announce the name of my practice, who I was, and I'd say I'm not available at the moment. However, I know this phone call is important to you, and I will get back to you within 24 hours. Please leave a message for the time that's convenient for me to speak with you. So just in that initial contact, you've got I understand that it's important. I'm showing empathy. I'm saying it's really important. I'm saying who I am. I'm saying the name of my practice, so they know they've got the right people. It's no good asking people to leave an answering machine message if they're not sure who they've got, because they might think I'm not sure who I phoned up. So I don't want to leave a message. And then some steps about how long you're going to take to get back to them. And if they leave a message, prompting them to say, when is it convenient? Because you don't want to phone someone up and they're on the bus, or they're in the middle of the tea with their family, or they're at work. So that's useful. And really express empathy and understanding, be it in your phone response, your answering machine message, or your email response. And it's important to demonstrate your understanding. Are you making the client feels seen and heard, but also that you're really interested in their business. And if someone's paying you money for your services, you run a business. And I think that's important. And I think to do that, we use language that conveys warmth and understanding, and acknowledge some of the emotions that they may be going through. You don't have to go over the top, but might say, I understand that you're reaching out for help, and it might be a difficult time for you, but if you leave a message with a convenient time for me to get back, I'll get back to you within 24 hours. And I think that is a respectful way of sort of opening the conversation with clients.
Yeah, and just another kind of tick next to the importance of having a dedicated line for your practice.
Yes.
So like you said, Rory, you don't want an email that just says, hi, I'm unable to take your call right now, but please leave a message of how I can help you and I'll get back to you. That could be anything. That could be a shop. It could be a curtain shop. Could be anything. It could just be a personal number. You want to be saying, hi, this is Kenneth Kelly from ABC Counselling. I realize that your call is important. And as you've said, Rory, you kind of talk them through that and warmly and empathically recognize their call and give them an indication of when you might get back to them. In your case, Rory, you've mentioned within 24 hours. I think something that underpins what you might leave on your voice message is the actual process of checking your voice messages and your emails. So this applies to both, or any kind of incoming communication. It might be a form on your website that somebody fills in, but it comes into you. It's important, I believe, to have a dedicated space for listening to and responding to the messages that come in, rather than haphazardly doing it in between sessions or when you have the time. And the reason for that, if you have a structure around it, let's say 11 o'clock each morning, I spend from 11 to 11:30 going through my messages and replying to those. And if there aren't any messages, then I look at what are the incoming pathways and are the messages that they receive when they get there adequate and appropriate for now. So I might use the time, if I haven't got any messages, to revisit my voicemail or look at my autoresponder that goes out from my email. But by having a fixed place, you can kind of assure yourself that you're not going to miss it from a busy day. And we all have those busy days. We've had them in practice where you wake up and it's just a whirlwind, and before you know it, you're at the end of the day with a cup of tea, catching your breath, going, wow, that was an incredible day. I can't believe I saw 5 clients today. That was a lot of running around. And we may then just forget the importance of, I didn't manage to check my email today. I didn't manage to check my messages today. So that importance of putting it in a time and a place that is easy for you to get to. And I guess things that you want to avoid, and this is whether you're using a message or an autoresponder. And Rory's already mentioned what an autoresponder is. It's basically when an email is sent to your inbox and you aren't there, it's an email that goes out immediately. And it would kind of reflect what you might say in your voice message. It's going to be more or less the same kind of thing. It's going to say who you are. It's going to say your practice name so they know they have the right place, and it's going to maybe give a little bit of information of what, inviting them to give you some information and letting them know that you will get back to them at a certain time and a certain place. Now, what we want to avoid, both in our message or our autoresponder, is any form of jargon, anything that might not make sense to the counsellor. And this can include things like our modality. We might say, hi, this is Ken here, and I'm a TA therapist, and I'll look forward to hearing from you. And the person might be thinking, what's a TA therapist? We know that's transactional analysis. And even if we put in transactional analysis, they may not understand what it is. So we want to avoid any of the jargon that we will use in counselling and psychotherapy and keep the words as simple and plain as they can. Just another do, Rory. I know I'm in don'ts now, like don't use jargon. But I think what's also important in your reply is to acknowledge that there will sometimes be people that are reaching out to you in some state of crisis. They may be at the end of the rope. They may be in an incredibly distressed place when they reach out. And you're not there, and you're not able to deal with them in that moment. You're not a blue light service. it may be respectful to have in your phone message and also in any autoresponder that gets sent out emergency information. So if they were here in the United Kingdom, I might put in the Samaritans. At the very bottom, I might say something like, if you are in extreme distress and you need immediate help, you can reach out to the Samaritans. And I might put in a link and a telephone number there. If I was working with young people, I might put in the link for Couth, which is a service here in the that works with young people here in the United Kingdom. So that's just another do on your message or autoresponder. So on the don'ts, we don't want to be using jargon. And we don't want to be impersonal. And I think this is really important. We don't want to look at this interaction as being about us. The interaction, if we look at it in its plainest and form, we strip away everything. It is a human being who is probably at some level weighed down by the life that they're living, that is reaching out. They're starting a conversation with us. They're opening up a dialogue with us when they reach out, whether it be on the phone or whether they email us or fill out a form. They're starting that conversation. So we want it to be a personal communication and dialogue with that person, not about us. I only get to do my emails over lunchtime. I've got a very busy practice. I don't have any spaces left. My practice is I will send you my forms. All of that is about us. How can you take any word I and turn it around and try and look at that from the client's perspective? And that might be as easy as saying, to fully understand where you find yourself, I've attached a short questionnaire that will give me a real feel for where you are at so that we can work with what you're presenting with. That's better than, I've got this form I need you to fill in and send back to me. It's just looking, how can we be personal to that person that is reaching out to us, Rory? And I guess the next one is to not overwhelm with that first contact information, but you can tell us a little bit more about that, Rory.
Yes, I think that, clients do feel anxious and uncertain. Certainly it was in my case, I felt anxious and uncertain. And it's about clear and concise information. So if you are imparting information, maybe you want to send out a form just to get some details from the clients. You may want to do a risk form or a form about what's being presented. Then make sure the information is clear and concise, and why you're asking for this information, how the information will be stored, and how long you'll keep it. So there's a data protection piece in there. And I think sometimes, I think sometimes as therapists, we get a little bit lost in our own hyperbole. It's a great word, isn't it? Our own hyperbole. In other words, our own understanding of our model of therapy. And actually, clients, generally speaking, don't know that much about how therapists work. So give a brief overview of how you work, what you can work with, and what could be expected from the session, and practical information like session lengths, fees, cancellation policy.
Yeah.
And I think, Ken, and this is something that you've spoken about many years ago when you started your practice, the free getting to know you session. I think there's no better way of meeting a client and just getting to know them. And that might, in business terms, have a better conversion rate. In other words, by meeting you, they may think, yes, this is the person for me, more likely to work with you in practice. They may very well say, well, I don't think we're a good fit and I want to find someone else, which is fine. But a getting to know you session where you could get to know the client, they could get to know you, and you could just start that journey together. And I think within that, giving the clients a voice, if you're sending things out on email, making sure that you invite questions, any questions, please make sure that you email me. I'll answer any questions you want. And that gives people the feeling of being in control, and it can ease, can ease anxieties around therapy. And just very simply let them know that you welcome any questions about the process, and what they can expect. And I think that's really important, because I think when people come to therapy, I know certainly in my private practice, you were looked on by some as a doctor. in that same kind of looking up mode. And I think it's very important to equalize the power the best you can, and to build this kind of co-created relationship. And by inviting questions, ask me anything, you're starting to build that, and you're starting to build the equality of power, which is so important when you're building a therapeutic relationship.
Indeed. I like how you brought in that first free session. And here we're speaking about email, and we've spoken about somebody maybe phoning you and an answering machine message, or maybe you answer the phone live. But there are also incidences where the first time you're going to see that client, the very first contact is when they sit in front of you. And for example, when I was in placement, the very first time I knew anything about the client was when they came in. I might have had a bit of a referral form, but I preferred to hear it from them themselves. And the same as what we're discussing here applies to those first minutes in session, that first part of time that you spend with that client, how that is handled. And it follows the same do's and don'ts as you're going to find on the handout, really. And that first free session, I think, was important in my practice. And you need to make a decision of where this fits for you. But for me, I measured the conversion rate on my free session. So what do I mean by that? Well, I invited everyone that was interested in working with me, even when they were sure and said, you're the person I want to work with. I would give a 20-minute session for them to get to know me, for them to kind of bring what it is that they're looking to get, to make sure that my competence fitted the presentation. And for me to field this client, to see who they were. And I measured the conversion rate on that. So, and it converted at 80%. So in other words, 80% of the people that came to see me in those free sessions went on to share time with me in a meaningful way in counseling. And I'm so grateful, because it means that 20% of people didn't feel that I was the right fit for them. It wouldn't have sat comfortably had they been paying for sessions and feeling that I wasn't the right fit for them. I wanted them to be able to discover that in that introductory session, so they could go and find the counsellor that was the right fit for them. Because at the end of the day, I went into this, and as I'm sure many of you listening to this, if not all listening to this, to make a difference. And whether I'm counselling that person or somebody else is counselling that person, my interest is in them getting the care that they need. I came into this for the benefit of clients, as I'm sure most of us do. And I guess it goes back to just in those questions or that interaction that we may be having, beware of opening a client up specifically on the phone. So we've spoken about a phone message, but maybe you're there, or maybe you do answer the phone. Beware of giving too much space for the client to start going into their material, and they will be tempted. And you'll have seen this in practice. You sit down in practice and a client will come in and you'll say, "Hi, I wonder what it is that you're looking to discuss today." And for 40 minutes, 45 minutes, this client will just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. It's natural in those first sessions for a person to kind of spill everything of where they are. But within a session, you have a time-boundaried environment. You've got your confidentiality there. You both know why you are there, and you're able to hold that and then respectively make sure that that client is closed up and ready to go out and face their day again. Whereas on a telephone, if we just say, "Oh, I wonder what it is. Tell me a little bit about what you want to talk about in counseling." As soon as that person might start going into their presentation and getting deep into that presentation, how do we close them down or hold them? And what happens if our time is being called and we've got another client in 3 minutes' time that we have to be there for? So just watch out for asking for too much of that presentation if you are corresponding on the phone. We don't want to leave a client, I guess, at the end of the phone wondering, why did I say all that? I don't even know this person. The trust in the relationship hasn't been built yet. And of course, if you're working by a phone or online, you will know of the theories of John Schuler and the disinhibition effect, which suggests that a person, when online or remote via telephone, may be likely to share deeper levels of what is going on for them prematurely, before relationship is built, because there's almost the theory suggests there's almost a disinhibition. There is a distance between you and me. It's almost not real. It's a safe place. I can just put it in there. I can just put it down. We don't want that on the phone, because what tends to happen with that disinhibition effect is that post that, the client can feel regretful or remorseful for sharing so much and thinking, who was that person? And I said this and I wish I hadn't said that. And now this is banging around in me, and now it's all fresh again, and now it's all happening again. So I guess that is one area of the don'ts to avoid.
Yes, it's a real skill, that, I think, isn't it, Ken, to be able to be boundaried when you're having a telephone conversation.
Yeah.
And you may want to practice that with the peer. I would suggest that if you're not sure how to do that, find someone who's a peer and just practice it. Because yes, you don't want to open people up, and you're absolutely right, Ken, about the disinhibition effect. And people, it's oversharing. People will overshare, and sometimes when clients have got a story to tell, and they're really full of that story. I always used to refer it, when I used to train people, as a shook up pop bottle, or a Coca-Cola bottle, or a Pepsi Cola, or any other colas that are available bottle, and you shake it. And before people send me letters, and I'd shake it, you'd shake it, and then when you took the top off, it'd all come flying out. And you know, as we all know, when you shake up a cola bottle, you have to release the pressure gradually to stop being covered in cola.
Yeah.
And that's what you have to do when you work with a client. You have to just allow enough space to get a sense of what they need, but not so much space that they release the top and it all comes flying out. And I think also that speaks to not making assumptions, because I think sometimes we hear recurring themes from clients, maybe relationship issues, maybe a job issue, maybe a challenge with sexuality or gender. These are all recurring issues. It may be loss and bereavement, all recurring issues. But we don't want to make assumptions that what they are feeling is out from our frame of reference. People may feel very different things to what we believe. Just because someone said they've lost somebody doesn't mean that they're absolutely bereaved about it. It could be they're very pleased. Yep. Quite frankly, I've had people have come to me and they said, I feel very bad because the person has died, and I actually feel quite relieved. And that isn't an unusual emotion. So don't make assumptions, and certainly don't rush the process. Yeah. If it's an inquiry, just take it steady. Make sure that they're treated like an individual, not just someone on a sausage machine conveyor line, and just engage thoughtfully. And again, the way forward, as you've said, Ken, is that initial 20-minute meeting, that free consultancy, where you can meet up with the client and see if you're a good fit. And finally, on this point, Ken, the reason I brought this is I was speaking to a colleague at a professional body, and there is a growing number of complaints from clients about first contact.
Yep.
A growing number of complaints where people are putting in complaints because they feel they've not been respectfully engaged on the first contact. So it is an area where complaints are raised and professional bodies are taking an interest.
Yeah. Oh, very much so. And if you're looking to upskill in this area, specifically with telephone and maybe perhaps working online, if you don't hold a formal qualification in online and telephone working, we at Counselling Tutor certainly have a certificate in online and telephone working that is mapped to the largest ethical body in the UK's best practice guide for working online and by telephone. Just go to counsellingtutor.com and the information is there. If your interest was piqued by things like old John Schuler's theory that we were discussing there, and there's more. There's the black hole effect. There's a whole lot of stuff that plays out telephone and online or remotely that does not happen in the room. And just one last comment on this, Rory, when you're saying don't make assumptions, don't act from your own frame of references. I had a great lesson from my daughter, Kristen, and it was somebody who said to her, I am pregnant. And Kristen's response was, is that a good thing or a bad thing? She didn't assume with congratulations, because it could be commiserations. And there's an example of that that I learned from my 20-year-old daughter. Don't make assumptions. Yeah, there it is. That is ethical, sustainable practice, crafting meaningful connections. Get the handout, counsellingtutor.com. Click on the podcast tab, episode 295. It's there. It's free. Download it. Hold it in your hand. Look over it. And then maybe consider, what are the first steps in your practice for somebody getting in contact with you? And as we move away now from ethical, sustainable practice, we go into practice matters. This is the CPD section of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. It's where we try to bring you experts in their various fields on very niche topics. It's always interesting to have a peek into practice, somebody else's practice. And Rory, you met up with Kate Beckwith and spoke about using the outdoors when you're working with children, providing child therapy.
Absolutely. I'm always excited to meet outliers in our profession, people who think completely differently and have a different vista on how to work with clients. So I caught up with Kate Beckwith, who is using outdoors in child therapy. It is rather a long interview, but I promise it's well worth sticking in there, because of not just the enthusiasm, but also just this new way of working. I caught up with Kate, and this is what she had to say.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you, and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Sometimes we have guests that are so innovative in the way they practice that it's just a must-have to have on the Counselling Tutor Podcast. So I'm delighted to be joined today by Kate Beckwith, who has a unique practice called Kate's Garden, described on her website as a therapeutic practice with a difference, located in a private setting in a beautiful natural woodland environment of Friday Woods near Colchester, and offers unique psychodynamic counselling to children and young people up to the age of 25, including the use of outdoors, natures, animal, art and play. So thank you for joining us today. This sounds very, very exciting.
Thank you, Rory. It's really, really lovely to be on your podcast. I'm totally out of my comfort zone. I've never done anything like this before. So this is a new one for me, but I love your podcast. And I just thought, when I heard it, I just thought I've got to come on and speak with you about what I'm doing here. I love your podcast. It's something that I do to kind of relax, actually, when I'm having a bath or having a roast or something like that. It's just like when I'm cooking, or it just suits me because I've actually got ADHD, so I like to multitask. So I've learned so much.
It's always nice to interview a fan. So your garden. I mean, I'm looking at the website and put the name of the garden and the details of your website into the show notes page, so that people will be able to see what a beautiful garden you have. But it really is a unique initiative. So first of all, tell me how you started this. What gave you the inspiration to use this beautiful setting as a therapeutic space?
Well, I've always loved outdoors. So from when I was a child, really, being with my mum outside doing the gardening, or, going on walks and things like that. And actually we had a horse growing up, which was an absolute privilege. We spent a lot of time together being outside, and it's a really important part of my life. And so are the animals, and actually so's the art. So it's all kind of come together. And what happened was I found a bit of land. I was looking for a very long time, and worked with my partner to put this place together. So we've done a lot of work, and yeah, it's a real haven. And what happened was during lockdown was I was actually doing my training during lockdown, and I just decided I must incorporate this place into my therapeutic practice. So yeah, it's 2.5 acres of, you know, beautiful trees, and little by little I incorporated various things like the tree house, the tunnels, cut paths in, and then introduced the animals. And they're just they're a part of this, and they're a really important part of this. So yeah,
it's not often we interview someone who's got a 2.5 acre therapy room, I have to say.
It is a huge part. I've also got the therapy room itself as well. So that's where I'm sitting at the moment doing the podcast with you. And it's kind of, you know, your normal therapy space. It's well, let's talk about the normal therapy space actually, because if you imagine a normal kind of psychodynamic psychotherapy setting, you'd probably imagine like a couple of chairs and maybe a couch. It would be quite a neutral space, and maybe like some artwork on the walls, a plant in the corner. And then if you're kind of working with children, there'd be toys, and that's what I've got here. You know, I've got the doll's house. I've got all of the natural kind of open-ended materials. I've got all the, you know, I've got plastic toys, and I've got all the art materials here, and I've got a nice amount of space. And the children can go inside if they would like to, but they can also choose to go outside, and it's freedom of choice. So I've got the animals, the art, and then there's the outside and the nature-based, and it's the freedom of choice that's the most significant part of what I do. It's really child-led, and it opens up a whole load of opportunities for me as the therapist and the client as well. So I absolutely love it. I love working in this way, and I highly recommend it. And that's why I wanted to come on the podcast, is to share what I'm doing here and to hopefully inspire some other people to kind of do some similar things. And I know that everybody's not got 2.5 acres, but it's really not about having a lot of space. So yeah.
So you said if we can kind of drill down a bit, you work analytically. So I'm guessing that there's elements of, say, transactional analysis within that, and looking at subconscious processes, and working with maybe scripts. Would I be on the right track there?
No, it's more so psychodynamic psychotherapy is really kind of working with the unconscious. Like you said, it's very, very important. The relationship between the therapist and the client is incredibly important. And what comes through that is very much about early infantile experiences and early childhood experiences, and how that affects the lens that the child sees through. And I do a lot of parent work as well to help support them, to support the child. So it's lots and lots of parallel parent work. So it's kind of exploring through things like transference and countertransference. They're very, very significant in psychodynamic psychotherapy. And we can drill down into that a little bit if that would be helpful.
Yeah, that'd be. I think that's fascinating area. One of my favourite topics, a bit of transference and countertransference.
Yeah. So let me see if I can explain this well or not. So transference is how the child, so imagine there's a child and there's the therapist, and the child's experiences give them their perceptions of what an authority figure, or, you know, someone that they don't know, a stranger, is going to be like. So based on their experiences, they will project what they imagine, how they imagine they're going to be interpreted and viewed by that person. And so that's their transference. And I pick up on their transference feelings. And I might have I can use that to help me analyze what's going on. And I might have very strong countertransference feelings about the child. And so it's really important for me to be able to really be open to that and really honest about the way that I'm feeling about the child, because that will then help me to understand how the child is imagining that they will be perceived by other people. Does that
yes,
that make
it does make sense. And I have a 3.5-year-old granddaughter, and it's noticeable that the lenses that she sees her little world through. And some of those lenses are very clear and they're very accurate lenses, and others can have a distortion developed through misinterpretation of adults' actions or what she believes an adult is meaning. I think that with children sometimes we have to be very literal, and sometimes a child doesn't develop that nuanced understanding of communication. So I understand it very well, and it's it sounds like it's about trying to see the child's world through the canvas of the child's world, the picture that they see. And I get that. And in terms of, I guess, the countertransference, that's managing your responses to what is being explained and your feelings about that.
Yeah, first of all, it's about noticing in the first instance how I'm feeling, because sometimes it's so easy to not notice that you're feeling frustrated or you're feeling, overprotective or whatever it is. But that will tell us a lot about the relationships that they have with their main caregivers. So, potentially mum, dad, or, very significant people in their lives. And yeah, that will help inform the work. And so it's a lot about observing. It's a lot about, just noticing. And so Kate's garden and the environment gives me a brilliant opportunity to observe in lots and lots of different varied situations. And it also gives the child the opportunity to be in an environment they choose. So they get to be in an environment where they feel safe and they feel comfortable. So it might be that they want to run out into the garden. I've had clients that come and the first thing they want to do is just run, and they want to create space between me and them. And that tells me something instantly. What can happen sometimes, I think, in a traditional therapeutic setting, with the 2 chairs and the 4 walls, is that actually the client can shut down, they can feel claustrophobic, they can feel, nervous, and actually getting them into that setting in the first place is very difficult from certain circumstances. So it might be that they're a school refuser. So this is a much more kind of facilitating environment, and it's much more, it's exciting. I guess it's kind of, if you wanted to sell it to a child, because it's the parents often are the ones that are choosing their therapist for the child, and the child doesn't have that, they don't have that choice. Instantly, they get that choice when they get here. And if you wanted to sell it to the child, you'd probably describe it as like a farm park type place. Really. Yeah.
Yes, and it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I was a school counsellor for a number of years, and I think that I think the majority of the issues that young people have can be with adults in their life, either the way they perceive adults to be or the way adults behave towards them. And for therapists to give them that sense of freedom to explore and then to kind of make sense of the environment, I think is very powerful. I've certainly sat on the wall outside the school I was a counsellor at, counselling students. There was no one around. It was just a summer's day. It was a bit too hot in the therapy room, so we sat on the wall outside where there was no one around, and we had the session there, and it was noticeable just how different and nuanced that session was because of the environment we're in.
Absolutely. It really fits this kind of, psychodynamic work is all about what's going on in the moment, and this fits, this place fits that. It's very experiential, and it can help support clients to notice how they're feeling. This might be introduced through noticing physical sensations, what's the temperature like? Are they cold? Or, what does it feel like to hold the animal? And this helps set the scene for supporting them to notice how they feel internally, which is where we're getting to. So it's very much about, it's very much about, this is a brilliant way in, and setting up doing what we can to support the relationship to develop. So it speeds up that process because they feel more comfortable. And over time, the work progresses and develops, and we then go deeper. It's about layers. As with most therapy, I think it's about layers, but psychodynamic and psychoanalytic therapy, it can really go very, very deep. And this is I'm finding this to be a brilliant facilitating environment.
Yes, and I can hear the enthusiasm in your voice. You sound incredibly enthused by this idea. Were there any models of therapy that you or other people who are doing this kind of work that you drew off, or is this something that you've kind of created yourself by just experimentation, I guess?
This is a really good question. I am, as far as I'm aware, the only person in the UK doing psychodynamic psychotherapy and practicing in this way. So yes, there is no blueprint, there's no model, and I did go out on my own, and I have a fantastic supervisor who actually used to incorporate her parrot into her work. So she brought the animal inside, and so she's got, there are elements there and of understanding, and she's incredible. And so what I did was, because it's so new. Obviously, there are various different types of therapy which are similar to, like, have elements of what I do, but the difference is there's so much variety, and I think that links in with my ADHD and the fact that I, got so much going on. But yeah, so there's ecotherapy, and there's walk and talk therapy, there's art therapy, so animal assisted therapy. There's various things that I have been able to look at and learn from, and do CPD. I've done so much CPD. But there's nothing quite like this. And actually I've met some resistance because it's very new. It's a very new type of, approach. And anything that's new, I think sometimes is met with some raised eyebrows. But I have made great use of my supervision, and I have had that actually consistently every week. And I know not everybody has weekly supervision, but I've benefited from it so much. So no, Rory, in answer to the question, there isn't anything like this out there at the moment, but I would like to, I kind of feel like I'm on a mission to change the perception of therapeutic approaches with children. And I would like to inspire change and get outdoor psychodynamic psychotherapy on the map. I would like to get it out there as a new and very important model. So that's kind of why I'm here talking to you at the moment. And like I said, I know not everybody's got a lot of space. They might not have. Just to describe the setting, Rory, because I think I've kind of skipped that, is we've got an open part of the garden, and then there's the kind of tunnel as you go down through, and then I've got ponies. I've got a couple of miniature Shetland ponies who just kind of have a track system. And then I've got to the left, I've got some pygmy goats and some cooney pigs, and there's lots of chickens and a couple of guinea pigs. So there's a lot of space out there, and there's a lot of animals out there, and not everybody has that, and that it doesn't need it. I think that people can bring elements of nature and the outdoors into their practice. So whether it's opening up their garden or whether it's, popping a little bird feeder on the window. So there's this kind of natural interruption or stimulus that you can bring into the work.
Yes, and I think what I'm hearing is that you're ploughing new ground.
Yeah.
Not to overcook the metaphor, being that you're in a big garden, ploughing ground. But yeah, it feels like you're ploughing new ground. You mentioned resistance. What kind of resistance have you met? What are the themes of the resistance?
That's a good question. I have to be careful here, don't I? So I would say that I think it's more kind of, people don't understand what it is I'm doing here. So they make a leap. There's a presumption that perhaps it's more like a care farm or a farm park. That's what they understand. That's what they've seen so far. And so maybe that's what we're doing here. And that's not what we're doing here. And when I left my training, there was some, I knew what I wanted to do. And so I shared that with someone. I had the most brilliant training. I did a 3-year MA and it was absolutely superb and it's changed my life. So I don't want to say anything negative at all, but there was a sense that, should I be doing that? Is that the right kind of pathway to follow? And so that was my first kind of part of resistance, I think, was one tutor in particular kind of questioned it just as I left. And I was like, that's okay, you can question that, but I'm off and I'm going to go and explore this and experiment with it. And I've learned so much. And I would, like I say, like to share it. So
yeah, and I think that our profession does tend to be conservative with a small c, shall we say. It tends to be quite a conservative profession in terms of how we practice and the models that we work in. But as I say, it sounds to me like you're breaking new ground. And I think what's also helpful is that you say you don't need the type of environment you have. Therapists could try this in their in their garden, if they have a garden. So I guess my next question is, if there's someone who's listening to this and they're going, I think that's a really good idea. What kind of structures did you put in place? What would someone have to think about before offering this outdoor type of therapy with young people?
I think crossing the T's and dotting the I's is very, very important. So, first and foremost, finding a suitable insurance and making sure that you are covered. Just really thinking about your boundaries. Therapeutic work is very much about boundaries. So what happens when you move those boundaries and you go outside? Actually, children have a very different perception of privacy and confidentiality than adults would. So I think this lends itself much more, using your garden lends itself much more to working with children rather than working with adults necessarily. So, often the work isn't about what they're saying so much as what they're doing and how they're expressing themselves through their play. So they wouldn't imagine that being overheard might be a difficulty for them a lot of the time, but it's still a consideration. You need to think about, what's going on outside. Do you have respectful neighbours? Are you going to be able to tell them what you're doing and make sure that they're not going to be popping their head over the fence and saying, hi, Maureen, or, it's not appropriate. So there's things like that you need to think about. You need to think about, obviously, the safety aspect, make sure it's safe. It needs to be a containing, safe environment. And risk assessments are really important, whether it's your overarching risk assessment or whether it's individual risk assessments based on each person. Obviously, you risk assess in real time. You're always, one-to-one with your client. So that's really important. And then I mentioned the supervision. It's really important to have that, that conversation with someone and think with someone about that. And then, things like suitable clothing. It's really important that you're telling your clients, informing your clients that they need to bring that, because otherwise there's a restriction to going outside sometimes. And you yourself need to feel comfortable. And if you're working with animals, there's all sorts of things that we've got to think about, and their welfare is high priority. So, for example, I had to have an animal exhibition license. I don't know if you've heard of one of those. So anyone that works with animals at all across the board needs to have an animal exhibition license. So someone comes around and checks your premises and checks the animals and the accommodation and everything, and makes sure that they're being well cared for. So those are some of the main things that I would say.
Yes, I mean it's a whole add-on, isn't it, to a traditional therapy practice. My final question is how did the parents react to this? I mean, maybe parents have a view of what a child therapist does and where they enact their therapeutic trade, if you like. What's been the reaction of parents to this way of working that you've developed?
Really positive. So I was pretty much instantly fully booked and have a huge waiting list. So the kind of perception from parents is that this is good. It's a really concrete, good thing. And I often will ask the parents where they would like to be if they're coming in for consultations, parental reviews, parent work. Then initially I'll give them a tour and they get used to the environment themselves. And then sometimes when we're meeting, we'll walk around the garden, and actually it relaxes people. And I, it helps me too, because I'm much more relaxed, and everything is kind of, it's a difficult thing. It can be a very difficult thing to come to your child's therapist and kind of explore what's going on for your child. And so any way that we can make that a more pleasurable, more relaxed experience is positive. I think the parents they respond to it really positively.
Well, Kate, it sounds like you're definitely ploughing the new ground, either literally or figuratively, with your practice. Thank you so much for joining us. We will put the link to the show notes, to your website in the show notes. So for those who are listening, if you go to counsellingtutor.com, find the podcast tab, go into episode 295, and you'll find the link to Kate's website and her garden. So it just goes to say, and for me to finish by saying, Kate Beckwith, thank you so much for joining us.
Massive thank you to Kate. Massive thank you to you, Rory, for holding those all-important discussions, bringing us that continuing professional development through the eyes of other practitioners who are out there doing this important work. And that is where we leave Practice Matters, and we now go on to our Student Services. Student Services is sponsored by Counselling Skills Academy. Have you ever wondered if you're using counselling skills effectively? Confidentiality means we rarely see skills used by others, so it's no wonder that so many students say they lack confidence in their counselling skills. That's why I built Counselling Skills Academy. Counselling Skills Academy is an online course that you can do at your own pace. It will give you the skills competence and confidence to know that you're using your skills most effectively. You will see real counselling skills used by a counsellor in real life sessions, covering everything from how risk is assessed right through to working towards an appropriate ending. Visit counsellingskillsacademy.com to learn more and to claim your Counselling Tutor discount. That's counselingskillsacademy.com. And in student services today, we're going to be speaking about the challenges of having compulsory placement supervision, Rory.
Yeah, so you may be somebody who is just about to start your search for a placement, and you come across a placement and you think, oh, great, I've got a placement, because they are, from our Facebook group, from what I can see in our Facebook group. And if you're not a member of the Facebook group, Counselling Tutor, Facebook, put in Counselling Tutor, and then you'll find us, and you can see the conversations that are going on. And, you may be somebody who is looking for a placement. It could be at a premium. You find a placement, and then you find you have to have compulsory supervision. What do I mean by that? I mean that you can only use the supervisor that is attached to the placement. And this is something that is becoming quite a thing recently, from what I can gather. And there are some pros and cons about it. So initially it might be, oh, great, I get supervision built in, which is really good, because that means it's all in one place. But when we're thinking of choosing a supervisor, one of the things that, certainly I've observed over the years of teaching is that people have to feel, or students like yourself really have to feel secure and relatable or related to with the supervisor. And some will see a number of supervisors before they choose one. And it's quite interesting when we talk cohorts of students who are going on to practice. They all have different supervisors, and they all have different experiences of the supervisors they'd seen. And some people see Supervisor A, think they were great. Some say, oh, I really don't like Supervisor A, I'd rather see Supervisor B. And that's fine. And the key to this, in my mind, Ken, is that when you go to supervision, you've got to share all of your practice. You can't be holding back. You can't be saying, I'm not going to bring that client because, I don't want to. And in fact, one of the things that we teach on our supervision course is, if someone says, I've got 5 clients, but I want to bring someone today, a good supervisor say, no, let's talk about that client. Let's talk about the client you're not bringing. Because, sometimes, certainly students sometimes hide clients from you because they feel they made a mistake. So, if you're having compulsory placement supervision and you've not built a strong enough relationship with the supervisor that you're compulsory have to see, it could be that you're not comfortable, and also you're not bringing all of your client work to them. So that's a consideration. And also, part of compulsory supervision can be the business model of the placement. So some people offer a placement, and to fund that placement, and there's nothing wrong with this, because money is tight in the third sector, they may literally have to charge students for supervision to be able to, contribute to the organisation. Lots to think about, Ken, with compulsory supervision.
There is. And I just want to put out here, for the record, supervision is compulsory when you're in placement. This we know. There's not an ethical body out there that does not say that when you're in placement and you're client-facing that it is compulsory. You're going to need supervision, clinical supervision. So what we're speaking about is not the fact that you have to do that supervision. It's when the placement that you are doing your hours at say you need to use our supervisor. Yeah. Now, there are pros and cons to this, and Rory's spoken about a number of the considerations. I'm going to speak about some of the pros. Number one, it may be that if you're in a specific organization and they are saying you will use our supervisor, it may be that takes away the supervision cost. It doesn't mean it always is this case. You've just touched on, Rory, that sometimes there will be a cost for that, but generally it'll be a lower cost than you might find if you went out and found your own personal supervisor. So that might be a pro. That might work for you. It may be that the supervisor that works within that organization or that charity has a special understanding of the client presentations within that organization and may therefore be in a better place to supervise regarding those presentations. So there is another pro that may fit in for you. So we're not saying that if you are in placement and you are taking supervision from the placement, that is a bad thing. This is just a consideration, and we're sharing kind of some of the past experience we've had of being tutors together with students that were on placement at practice level, and they would come in and they would speak in professional discussion about their supervision journey. Now, if you go back to the beginning of this podcast under ethical, sustainable practice, we spoke about, one of the topics we spoke about is being the right fit for the client. And I shared that I do a free introductory session so the client can see if I'm a fit for them and if they're a fit for me and my competence level. The same is true of supervision, I truly believe. It is a relationship. It is an important relationship. It is one of the most important professional relationships you will hold as a counselor or psychotherapist is with your supervisor. If you have a question, you're going to go to your supervisor. If you've got a doubt, you're going to go to your supervisor. If you want to implement something new in practice, you're going to go to your supervisor. If you have a complaint, you're going to go to your supervisor. Very often, a supervisor is our first port of call. And it's important that we feel that this is a person that we want to work with, that we share values with. That is really important. And when I was offering supervision within my practice and somebody would come again for that initial free session to see if I was the right supervisor for them, I would highly recommend that they spoke to at least another 2 supervisors before making their decision, because it's such an important decision. And sometimes, if you're being given the supervision as part of the placement, you don't get to call that. You don't get to make that decision. You get who you are given. And I guess sometimes that's going to be a great fit, and there's nothing wrong with that, but there may be times when you don't feel that person resonates with you. One of the other considerations, and I think this is really important, this is where supervision internally within an organization where you are where you are asked to integrate with their supervision may start kind of the needle going out of what is 100% ethical, and that is if there is a role confusion within your placement. So if the person that oversees the practice, in other words, the practice manager, is also the supervisor, then there is a confusion in roles. So you got one person that you'll go to for your practice management, talking about the day-to-day running of the practice within the organization. If that same person is the supervisor, it gives you a challenge. And I'll tell you what the challenge is, because it might not be immediately show itself. The challenge is, what happens if you feel unhappy with your placement? If you're unhappy with your placement, and you have a supervisor which is your supervisor and is separate from the placement, you can go there and you can say, hello, supervisor, I'm really despondent with my practice. I don't like the way that they are doing X, Y, and Z. And your supervisor will work with you around that. However, if the supervision is within the organization and there is that role conflict, then maybe you wouldn't feel safe to say to that person that you're unhappy with certain elements of how the practice is run, because you may feel that it may jeopardize your position within it. So think about that, I guess, when looking at supervision that is offered, if there is compulsory supervision offered within a placement. The other consideration is it is not unusual for a student to hold more than one placement. I certainly did. Many of the peers on my course did. Many of our students did. You got quite a number of hours that you need to accrue, supervised hours, while you're in placement. And sometimes that means having more than one placement to be able to get those hours in. Now, who's supervising the other hours? And how does that look when you have to put in your final work and evidence your hours? How does that look if you've got fragmented supervision? Got one supervisor who did these 40 hours and another one who did these 20 hours and another one who did these 40 hours. It becomes confusing for you. Who is the supervisor that would write the overall supervision report, which is something you're going to require for your final portfolio and submission? So that is something to think about as well. And I'm going to throw one last consideration in, Rory. It's not unusual for a student, and we certainly had students like this, that would have supervision offered through their placement, but they would also choose to pay for separate supervision so that they had a supervisor that was separate to the organization as well. Now, this does bring up other things to consider, because you may get one piece of advice from one supervisor and another piece of advice from another supervisor, and which one do you listen to? So it really can be quite a tricky process, Rory.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm going to pick that last point up, because that is a really, really important point. Because if you're working with an ethical dilemma and you go to supervisor A and they say, well, this is how I'd work with it. And then you go to supervisor B and they say, this is how I'd work with it, and it's slightly different. As a student, yes, Ken's throwing his arms up on the other side of the studio.
Like, what do I do?
What do I do? What do you do? And the thing is to remember that as a student counsellor, you don't have as much agency. And I'll explain what I mean by that, as a qualified counsellor. So if there was a complaint raised, a qualified counsellor could say, I'm qualified, I've been practicing a few years, this is the view that I took. If you're a student and maybe this is your first couple of hours in practice, agency means the ability to defend your decisions, because we're all about defendable decision making in counselling. And it might be difficult to defend decisions. And part of working with a good supervisor is that they will, for want of a better phrase, they will carry you for a time as you're developing your practice and developing that internal supervisor, that kind of way of thinking that brings on ethical outcomes. And initially, that needs to be nurtured and developed in a supervisor. And once that internal supervisor's matured, then you've got agency. Then you can say why you've made a decision. But if you're working with two supervisors and you've got an ethical dilemma, it can be very, very, very difficult. And as Ken said, who signs your hours off at the end of the day? Because you've got to have your hours signed off. And also the cost. If you're paying one supervisor who's compulsory, i.e. that you have to have the supervision that the placement provides, and an external supervisor, you could be looking at quite a lot of money. I mean, at £50 an hour, that's £100 a month. That's a heck of a lot of tea bags, Ken.
It is a lot of tea bags, Rory. But yeah, this is a tricky topic, and again, we're not here to give you an answer. We're just here to say, here's some considerations for you. And from past experiences with learners and their journey, some have opted to say, well, thank you very much for the offered supervision that comes free with this placement. I'm going to choose to not take that up. I'm going to choose my own supervisor. And there's nothing wrong with that, unless there is a compulsory element. And if there was a compulsory element, I'd be questioning it, but that's just me. That does not mean that you should question it. That is just my view on that. And there's been a number, it comes with the experience, doesn't it? And hearing the stories. And as a supervisor myself, when I was in supervision practice, it wasn't just one incidence of this, but there were two incidences that I can remember of agencies that lost their funding and their contract ended and they were replaced by a different agency. And the result of that was students that were losing their supervisor that was kind of going away, and they had to get to know somebody else at the end of their journey. And the other part to consider is when you graduate, when you finish and you kind of move on and you're going into practice, if you're moving away from the agency, you're moving away from your supervisor. So you kind of breaking that relationship and that bond that you've created and those foundations you've built with somebody who has been there throughout the development of your practice. And of course, I know that it can be really beneficial that when you do finish your agency and then go on to build your practice and start getting out there, maybe even your own private practice, if you've got the supervisor who kind of journeyed with you along the whole of that journey, perhaps they know you a little bit better. Perhaps you feel a little bit more comfortable with them. But again, These are not absolutes. They're just considerations. And of course, there is nothing wrong with engaging with a supervisor within an agency if it serves you and your clients.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as Ken said, we're just bouncing this idea around just so that that you listening out there can make an informed decision. That's basically it. You can say, yes, I'm quite happy with having the supervision that's provided by the agency. Of course, all supervision is compulsory, but who you choose, we're talking about, the choices made for you if you're going to a certain placement. So, you can make an informed decision. But it's an interesting one, and it was quite interesting to see how it played out with the students that we taught. Some people were very happy with it, and it worked very well. Others hankered for something more. They felt their supervisor at the placement, they wanted something more, and at least one said to me, "I think it's hampering my growth as a therapist."
Yeah.
So food for thought, Ken.
It is indeed. And if you're a qualified therapist and you're listening to this right now, it means that you've made it right through a student-led section on supervision. And we thank you for kind of lending us your ears for that. If you are a qualified therapist and you're mature within your practice and you're listening to this and thinking, how can I make a difference? Well, maybe it's time for you to train as a supervisor. And if you're considering, I'm mature in my practice, I'm ready to train as a supervisor, well, Counselling Tutor do offer a advanced certificate in counselling supervision. We include online and telephone working within that. So it's face-to-face supervision within the room, but we also cover the additional modules that are required from the UK's largest ethical body, the BACP, on supervising via phone and online as well. And if you're interested as a qualified practitioner in more information, just go to counsellingtutor.com. It's right there on the homepage. And of course, this has been episode 295 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Yes, we started with ethical, sustainable practice, crafting meaningful connections, enhancing your first contact with counselling clients, making sure that the journey that a client takes from picking up the phone or tapping on the keyboard is as painless and seamless as possible so they can get the help they need and deserve. We moved on to Practice Matters. We talked with the fabulous Kate Beckwith, who's using the outdoors in child therapy, a real outlier and a real creative thinker in child therapy, and a very insightful interview. And then straight on to student services, the challenges of having compulsory placement supervision, the pros and I guess the cons. So before we part ways today, I have two little requests for you. If you liked our podcast and if the topics resonated with you, please give us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast platform. We love a 5-star review, and it's a simple way to support us and help the community grow. And if you know someone who might appreciate today's episode, a peer or someone who you think, they could do with hearing this, pop it on their timeline or give them an X or a tweet, whatever it's called now, and let them hear it as well, because we just love to be connected and reach more listeners. And we really, really are thankful that you're allowing us to be part of your journey. So until next time, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.